Welcome to Pioneer Mindset, a place where we challenge our mindset and address the discomfort in both business and life by finding clarity resulting in bold conviction. I'm your host, Garrett Ruskamp, fifth generation farmer, husband, and father from rural Nebraska. Whether you're navigating frustration from past decisions or worry about the uncertainty you face today in your business, we're going to learn from our struggles and take on new challenges with a resilient mindset. Join me as I share my journey of struggles I faced in agriculture as a farmer and family man. I'm ready to dive into honest conversations to tackle the mindsets surrounding key issues that rural ag business owners face that will ultimately help you gain control, leading to a profitable and sustainable business. Let's adapt to Pioneer Mindset and get to it. Welcome back, everyone. For today's episode, I'm going to be talking about decisions. There's lots of decisions that we need to make as business owners, as fathers, husbands, wives, mothers, whatever that is. There's tons of decisions that we need to make on a daily basis. But where I'm coming from on this is essentially decisions that we need to make within our business. Obviously, there's many decisions throughout the day. And I think the one thing that when it comes for, say, like a business owner versus, say, like maybe a business employee even, or if you work for somebody else, the decisions that we make, there's probably more of them, but there's also more weight that comes with those decisions. And so that can basically result in a lot of stress that that weight from those decisions causes. And so I was kind of working through a decision myself here recently. And to be just completely upfront and honest, I can sometimes be a pretty indecisive person. And I think that, looking back at why that is, for me recently, I would think that some of that goes back to some of the decisions that we made within our business in the past because of the consequences that we had to make. Ultimately, what it comes down to is being a little bit gun shy about some of these decisions. And so that's why I was trying to think through this thought process that I had and like how I kind of worked through it. Ultimately, the decision that I decided. And so I kind of want to get into that. But I think really when it comes to making these decisions, for me anyways, or for lots of people, is if we drag our feet with some of these, if we're maybe not super decisive, I think it's the fear of the unknown. I mean, obviously, we when it comes to making whatever the decision is, big, small, or whatever, I'd say, there's obviously, we know the benefits. We know that there's going to be benefits to this decision, but we also know the consequences. And I think that's the part that we struggle with, is not knowing 100% what the consequences are going to be. And so that's why I was kind of struggling with this, is because obviously there's going to be some benefits, but I didn't know exactly how everything was going to play out. And so just to kind of give you a little bit of context about what I'm talking about, the decision that I was essentially trying to make on our farm is this is going to be a dryer project for a grain bin setup. And so we already actually purchased the dryer and we purchased an air system. Got those bought. They were used, fairly reasonable. So I had that already bought. So, we kind of committed already to kind of going through with this project, but it was more or less the act of getting it all set up, having somebody come in, pour the pad for the dryer, pour the pad for the propane tanks, getting a, double run type of auger setup from the wet bin up to the dryer, and then just getting everything plumbed in accurately so everything was going to work. And when it comes to a dryer, for those who are not familiar, there's lots of benefits to the dryer. So that's what I was essentially doing, is I was trying to list out the pros and cons. Okay, so let's start with the pros. Pros in our situation is to getting a corn harvested sooner. And there's a lot of benefits to that from maybe a yield standpoint. A lot of benefits to getting the corn out of the field a lot sooner. For us, we can actually come back in and plant a cover crop sooner. So there's benefits there. And then we can also just move on with the fall. If weather changes and all of a sudden we get to, end of October, Halloween time, and our fall has changed, we want to be done. There's always benefits to being done sooner in most cases. And so I was definitely listing out those benefits, being able to get grain to the elevator during maybe a premium seasonal time frame. And so I was just trying to list out those benefits. But in some cases, when it comes to these benefits, it's hard to put a dollar amount on them. So it's always like, well, I think this is kind of what we can gain from that. So now the cons, the obviously listing pros and cons here, trying to figure out, what are going to be the drawbacks if I don't go through with this, or if we do go through with this and it doesn't play out, essentially the consequences. So some of those that I was trying to come up with was, okay, well, this is going to be tight on our cash flow to go through with this project. Or maybe it's not going to work out like I want it to, or the setup isn't going to be quite right. Or the big one, honestly, was going to be the drawback financially, just the capital that it would take to go through with this project. Now, it wasn't a huge project, but it was going to be a substantial amount, I felt like. And so it was definitely something that definitely weighed me down, especially seeing the markets where they're at today in the economy. And basically the decreased markets and essentially decreased in revenue. We're not going to have enough revenue to go around to take care of some of these projects, and we're going to be short. And so there's stories playing in my head, and I feel like the consequences, it just kind of depends on the situation. But sometimes the cons can tend to be louder, the stories in our head, or sometimes we can actually be blinded by some of the benefits that we think are out there. We can be blinded by basically only focusing on the benefits and not realizing that there are going to be some cons. And maybe at that point, we go through the project and we get caught with our pants down. And so there's always different things like that we need to worry about. And so I was definitely really wrestling with the pros and cons. Now, one thing that I like to do when it comes to making decisions is, if I can, I like to find my conviction through the facts. I ask myself, what are the facts? Try to list that out. And one way to do that is to kind of focus on the numbers. In my opinion, I feel like numbers don't lie. The numbers that are on the paper are what they are. But at the same time, numbers can be manipulated. Basically, the numbers are only true or only as true as the one that puts them together. And so I was trying to focus on the numbers a little bit, trying to go back to that side of things, because I feel like that's very important to focus on that, especially when some of the cons in this situation have to deal with drawbacks as far as being tight on cash flow, or really just worrying about if we're going to be able to have the cash to take care of this, or if it's going to return what it's supposed to, different things like that. So I was trying to focus on the numbers. And essentially when I came down to it, I went to my software tool called farm.I. I went through and I was looking at that, trying to make some decisions with that tool, so I could essentially find clarity in trying to make this decision. So as I got to looking at my farm.I, basically my cash flow side of things for the next basically 6 months of this year or and beyond, and I got to looking at my projections, specifically when it comes to the crop that we're about to bring in, and essentially in the next 2 months we'll start to market that crop. And so as I was looking at that, I've done my projections quite a while ago, essentially back at the end of the year. And so I was looking at some of the notes I had put on there. Corn sold at maybe 460. It's kind of some of the notes for corn that I put on there. Obviously today, as I record this end of August, the corn price is no longer 460. We've dropped significantly. And so that would obviously put a pretty big damper on our total revenue. And so I figured, okay, I need to, in order to find clarity, I need to actually go through and update these numbers. And I need to put honest, real projections out there as to what I think things are going to be. So the one thing that I also could change was when I did those projections, I was kind of going off of a yield of roughly 180 bushels per acre. And that's kind of more or less our guarantee or APH. So that's why I was using that number. Now, we've been fortunate enough this year where I think we could probably raise more than that. We've probably going to be closer to, I'm kind of guesstimating here, right around that maybe 200, 210, hopefully more, but that's kind of a somewhat conservative number that I think we can be able to harvest. So from there, I kind of took my acres, updated my projections as far as our yield estimates, and overall what I think when we're going to sell as far as what we have for storage. Okay, that's we're not going to have enough to store all that, so that means probably selling more at harvest time. And so I could basically update kind of roughly when I anticipate to take in some of that income. And so I could really kind of get a pretty clear picture as to what we're going to be bringing in, kind of to estimate the price on that, do it for corn, do it for soybeans, and then I did it as well as for our alfalfa. Alfalfa prices changed a lot around here. We're probably 3/4 through our growing season, so I've got a pretty good idea, kind of pretty good handle as to what we're going to have for inventory to actually market, what that's going to bring in for revenue. And so I kind of updated all those numbers. And essentially what this came down to was a difference in my projected year-to-date cash flow projections was about $50,000. literally just by updating all of my numbers, it was decreased by 50,000. And so just to give you an idea with this dryer project, just to get it all set up, getting running, the quote that we had was kind of right around that 50,000 mark. And usually there's always some added cost to that, getting everything wired up, getting everything plumbed. And then if we run the dryers, we're going to have propane cost in there, and all of that stuff has to be figured in. And so that was obviously, I figured that up, and that was kind of one of those things where, to be frank, I had actually somewhat committed with this decision. I kind of had it in my head that, we've got the dryer, we've got the air system. Why are we not going to build this? We need to go through with this. We need to go through with this. And so I'd committed to it. And so once I'd finally run those numbers, that's when this almost big decision started creeping back in, where I'm like, man, I'm already getting scarcity. I'm already trying to almost come back to a shell to where I'm like, I'm not sure if this is the right decision. That's to where I was starting to wrestle with this again. And so I kind of had to ask myself, I went through what are the facts? I went through the finances side. And then, one thing that when it comes to some of these decisions that somebody said is there's kind of two questions that you kind of need to ask yourself. What happens if we don't make this decision or if we don't go through with this? So I was trying to ask that to myself. Okay, well, in my head, I felt like we needed to do this because we already bought this dryer and all the equipment. But in the long run is we don't need to go through with this. Yes, we bought that. We won't get the value from the stuff that we already purchased, but that was a smaller amount because it was used. And so we can always hold on to that. And what happens is nothing really changes. We can do what we did last year. Our equipment wise, nothing really changes. We don't necessarily, by going through with this, we're not gaining extra storage. And so nothing really changes. That's an honest question that I had to answer. So that was good to know. And we can honestly hold on to the equipment. That's not going anywhere. We can always do it in the future. And so the other question to kind of go along with that is, do we need to go through with this decision? Does this decision need to happen right now? And essentially, that was kind of another question that you have to ask yourself. You need to be honest about it. No, I think in most cases, if you're asking yourself that question, do we need to do this? In most cases, the answer is probably no. Maybe there's some cases where you absolutely do need to go through with it. And then I think that can be a pretty hard deciding factor right there. But I think that's why we sometimes struggle with these decisions, is because we do not 100% need to go through with some of these. And now I'm talking specifically a project like this, or maybe an equipment upgrade or something of that nature, because these are the decisions that farmers, ranchers, and ag business owners face on a day-to-day basis, or maybe not necessarily day-to-day basis with some of these bigger decisions, but they come up constantly where we feel like these are opportunities. So we're trying to essentially figure out what's the best decision here. Now, when it comes to this specific project here, the one thing that ultimately kind of made me really shift my mind and was a big deciding factor is I had a friend of mine that reached out, and he brought up to me this other question that kind of goes along with these questions that I already mentioned, was, is this going to provide enough value for you to offset the cost? And so part of that was the value. Obviously, there's value in the pros that I mentioned, okay? But you've also still got to evaluate the cons. And the one con that he also mentioned that I did not think about was the time commitment. The time commitment that it takes to go through anything that's new. Especially like this would be a new endeavor for us, a new project, the dryer. I'm not familiar with dryers. I don't know how to run it. It would take time just to keep this thing up and running, to do what it's supposed to get the benefits out of this project. Is going to take time, energy, and focus that I probably honestly don't have. Yes, I want the benefits from it. But that was one thing that I realized as I got to looking at how this fall could potentially shake out and everything else that we've got going on. We've got quite a few things going on this fall. And I'm like, I don't know if I really have more time and energy to be focusing on something else. And so that was ultimately where I kind of had to step back. And at the end of the day, when it comes to some of these decisions, I literally hope that there's just this voice that comes in my head that says, hey, don't do it, do it, whatever that is. And then from there, I kind of got to own it. And so just to be clear, with this decision, I ultimately decided that, hey, we don't need to go through with this right now. We can wait. it was getting to be kind of last minute. Things are going to be kind of thrown in because, obviously we're getting close to starting harvest. We're talking maybe 45 days out from harvest, maybe less. I don't know. And I'm like, this is pressuring, getting a little bit too close down to the wire. Let's just hold off. There's a lot that went into this decision, but ultimately we decided to hold off. We can go through with it next year. We still got the equipment. We can do it another time whenever things feel right. As we see how the fall plays out, maybe we have got a really good harvest. Maybe we're harvesting 220, 230 bushel corn, and we can get some of that revenue back that I previously had on our existing cash flow. And so that's what my decision was. But when we talk about some of the decisions that we face on a day-to-day basis, or some of these big decisions, I feel like it's pretty easy, for me anyways, is I search for outside help. I search for somebody that's going to help me make this decision. And I think at the end of the day, I feel like if I have somebody that helps me make this decision, I can, and things don't go right, because that's ultimately what we're worried about is the consequences. I can put some of the blame on them because they're the ones that helped me make this decision. They told me to do this and it didn't work out, so let's put some of the blame on them. That's why sometimes I feel like we search for outside help to help us make some of these decisions, which really at the end of the day is not going to serve us, because when we make these decisions, it's our decision. We need to own it. We need to be responsible for everything that we're deciding to do. And so that's the next thing here is when it comes to these, I feel like we are searching for the perfect answer. We're searching for things to go the right way so we can honestly just be happy with the decision and things work out perfectly because everything is perfect. Yes, I'm being sarcastic here because honestly, there is no perfect answer. That's another thing that my friend mentioned. Man, this guy's it's always good to have good friends that kind of reach out at the right time for some of these decisions. But he had mentioned, there's no perfect answer, just a series of movements. And I thought that was really good because whatever the decision that we make is, there's going to be a consequence. There's going to be things that happen regardless. We're going to make the decision and things are going to right, wrong. The decision needs to be made. And then there's going to be a series of things that happen after that. And we just need to own that decision. And we need to realize that no matter what, things are going to move on and things are going to be okay one way or another. And we need to just realize and be okay with that. And I think ultimately that's to where I'm at anyways. I feel like I just want to make a decision and be happy with it. And I think that's something that we all struggle with because we're just so worried about the uncertainty of the future. Well, as we all know, the future is uncertain. That's just the way it is. We can do our absolute best, and I am preaching this to you as well as myself, as we can do our absolute best to have bold conviction in everything, every decision that we make. We can list out the pros and cons. We can go through our finances and figure out what's going to work, list out the facts, ask ourselves the questions of what happens if we don't do this? Do we need to do this? And is this going to provide enough value to you to have a return? Those are 3 really good questions there. So those are the things that we can do. But at the end of the day, it's kind of going to come down to intuition, gut, experience. What have you done in the past? How has that worked out? How did that play out? How did you feel after you made that decision? Are you going to regret it? These are the things that we need to ask ourselves when it comes to these big decisions. These are things that I've had to ask myself. And at the end of the day, you just need to have conviction in the decision, and move on. Honestly, make the decision and move on, because that's kind of where I'm at, is because the way my brain works when it comes to tasks, when it comes to these decisions, is I do not rest ultimately. I do not rest until I've got this decision made. Until I've got a task that's done and taken care of so I can get it off my mind, focus on the next thing. And so you need to do your due diligence, do the things that I talked about, make the decision and move on. Make the decision and be excited about how you're going to see how things play out, because you do get to make a decision and then you get to learn from that. You get to learn to see how things play out, and maybe it plays out for the better, maybe it plays out for the worse, and you learn from it. So at the end of the day, we don't know how things are going to play out, and I think that's okay, because if we did, how boring would life be, really? So I really hope this makes sense to you. I really hope you find value in this, and maybe it's hitting home. Maybe there's things that you can really take away from this. That's honestly all I got for now, and be sure to catch us on the next one. Thanks for tagging along with me today as we sharpened our mindsets. If you've gained insight from today's episode, be sure to take a screenshot to share or send this episode to somebody who might also find value in it. For more, follow me on Instagram @GarrettRuskamp or on Facebook, and join me next time for more conviction through clarity.